Guys, welcome back to yet another tutorial on web development, specifically looking at CSS. In the previous tutorial, we looked at margin, padding, and also looked at CSS specificity, right? And we mentioned to say in the next one, look at classes and IDs. So in this tutorial, what we're going to look at is specifically that, which is CSS classes and IDs. Then we also dive into what we call Flex. So we'll be looking at Flex, which will help us understand how we can create layouts using CSS. All right, so I think we can now dive into VS Code and be able to see how we can implement those classes, IDs, and also Flex. Okay, so here what you are seeing is the code from the previous tutorial. So we had just created a div and we gave it a class. Okay, so when you are looking at this div and I added a class, I mentioned to say we'll dive deeper into looking at classes and how we can use them, and also how we can utilize IDs as well. Okay, so those are the first things that we'll we'll basically look at. And as for my voice, my apologies. I just have a cough and a flu. So yeah, you bear with me. Yeah, so here we have styles.css. Okay, so this is styles.css, which is a file that we created for our CSS, right? And always remember, we discussed in one of the videos that we're looking at CSS, we talked about rather on how we can connect our CSS to our HTML, right? And one of the ways is using external CSS. That is creating a separate file, then you connect it to HTML. So this is a separate file that we've been using, and it's the most recommended way, because by doing so we get to separate functionality. So we write our HTML in one file like this and our CSS in one file. Okay, all right, so now let's just look at how we can use classes and IDs. Okay, so what's the difference between these two? We'll start by first looking at classes. So a class is used even on multiple HTML elements. Okay, when you add a class to an HTML element, we use that to target that element when looking at CSS. Okay, what do I mean by that? Previously, we learned that we need to target an element, and targeting an element, one of the ways was by using the element's name, right? So in this case, since we have a div, right, what would have done is that we would have targeted the div like this. Okay, would have targeted the div like that, right? But we didn't. Yes, so here in this div we used a class called top content, right? So it's this class that we get to now target inside our CSS, right? But even the way that we've put it by targeting the div itself, it can still work, right? If we remove this class like this and save our work and target the div, right, by giving it a background color, so it has a background color of blue, it has got a height, it has got a width, right? So if we check, it's still there. Okay, so this is still the same div that we are styling, all right, and it's a centered div because we've used margin, something that we are looking at in the previous tutorial. Okay, so now how do classes work, right? So like I mentioned, with any HTML element that you have, you go inside the open tag, right? We learned about open and close and closing tags. So you go inside the open tag, then you add an attribute. Okay, so an attribute just adds more information to the HTML element that you are working with, and there are different types of attributes, but the one that we're looking at today is an attribute called class. Okay, so every attribute, or let me say most attributes, have got a name, an equal sign, and double quotes, right? So the class here in this in this scenario is the name of the attribute, right? Then the double quotes now gets to hold the value of the class. So here we can name it like we had put it. We can name it, we can even say container, right? Let's say the name of our class is container. You can use the same container inside here. Okay, so let me just remove these tiles. Okay, let me save this so that we start from scratch. So if we refresh, we don't have anything here, right? Okay, good. All right, so here we have a container. So now how do we target a class? It's not the same as targeting an HTML element where we just say, for example, we just say container, then we start styling it, because in this case, we're not using an HTML element. So what do you use? It's a class that we're using, right? So for us to call a class, you have to start with a full stop, then the name of the class. In our case, it's container. Okay. So we say full stop container, then inside that's where now you put your properties. Okay. So here what we're going to do is that we're going to add a padding. Okay. So we're going to add a padding of 100 pixel. Okay. To our container, we want to add space inside our container. All right. So we've done that, right? So if inside this container we add, okay, a paragraph, okay, we add a paragraph, okay. So what I just did there is have let me use so I'm just using this HTML language features, which is just a beautifier, right? It just tells the what's this, the code to have that proper structure. Okay, it doesn't change anything to the code. All right, so we do have this paragraph. Okay, so if I go on my website and refresh, you'll see that we have this paragraph. Let me zoom in a bit. You'll see that we have this paragraph, but it has got spaces around it. Why? Because we applied padding, right? Remember what padding is? The space between the content and the border, right? Beyond the border, that's margin. Okay, so when you go in here, you notice we have a class to this parent div of container, right? Now, if you decide at any point to add another div, okay, and you also add another paragraph, so we just get the same, okay, we put it here. If we add a class here and we want it to have the same property, you can actually use the same name, okay, like that. If we save our work, check on the side, we refresh, you notice that we still have the same property. You've seen the same spaces. Now, the reason you are seeing these two apart from each other is because this has a padding of 100 pixels even at the bottom. So this at the top, so this space is 200 pixels. Okay, so if we do this, if we do this, let me just use this extension. Okay, let me refresh first. Okay. Let me try. Why isn't my extension working? Okay, let me refresh that. Okay, I don't know why the extension is not working. Okay. All right. Anyways, let me try maybe to go back and copy the link again. Okay. So I just copying the path to our file. Let's try to open it. Okay. Okay, it's not working. I think the reason it's not working, I think this one works on a local server because we've just used this direct path. Okay, yeah, so it's not working. Let's try running our project on a local server. So for you to run your project on a local server, you just need an extension in VS Code called live server. Okay, this one, live server, right? So I already have it installed. So once you install it, you can just, it's here at the bottom which says go live, or you can right click, then you say go live, like that. Okay, so that's our application. I hope this time it works. I've just zoomed in a bit. So let me see. Yeah, now it works. Okay, so if you check, this is our div. You've seen that. Okay, if I click there, right, we're able to see that it even has a class of what? Container, and you are seeing that it has a padding of what? 100 pixel. So that's the space, right? Then here at the bottom also, okay, you still have this. Okay, on top we have that. Okay, but at the bottom here you also have that. right? So we've been able to see that. So now the point here that you need to understand is that with classes, you can use the same class on different HTML elements. It doesn't just have to belong to a div. It can be a paragraph, it can be a div, it can be an input, it can be a h1, right? So the same class applies to different HTML elements. So as long as the class that you're using has properties that are compatible with those HTML elements that you're trying to change, it will work. But with the ID, it's different. With the ID, it's unique to only one HTML element, right? So if here we decide to use an ID, okay? So an ID is also an attribute. So if we decide to use an ID and give it a name of, let's say, container, okay? Say container, right? We save our work. Now, because I've saved the work, right? Here we've used ID of container, here we've used class, okay? When you go to your CSS, an ID is different. The way we call an ID, it's different from a class, right? So right now, the only thing that work is for the class because we are correctly calling the class. So if we look at our website and refresh, you will see, all right? So for the lifesaver, actually, there isn't even a need to refresh the page. It does that automatically. We save our work, right? So you can see that it doesn't have space for the ID, but the class is still working, right? So if we go to the CSS, the way you call an ID is by using this hashtag, then the name of the ID. So in our case, it's container, right? So it doesn't matter whether the class has a name of container and an ID of container, right? As long as they are different. It's not, we're not applying classes here, right? There is an ID and a class, okay? Right. So here, if we put padding, let's add padding of, let's say the same one, right? 100 pixel. Okay, when we check the work, you can now see that it's working, right? Okay, so let's try a different name so that we see that it's not about the name, right? So here we just say top, okay? So this is an ID that we've changed to top. So here, even the ID needs to change to top, right? So when we save our work, it's still the same, okay? So yeah, that's how IDs and classes work. So remember, for you to call a class, you need to use the full stop. But for you to call an ID, use a hashtag. Okay, so this is how we basically use IDs and classes in CSS. Okay, let's look at another example. Okay, so I'm just going to remove this. Okay, then right, we'll have a class like that. Okay, have a class like that. This class will call it container still, right? So most of the time when we name something container, we're just using it as the main parent where everything will go, right? So if you have those general CSS properties that you want to apply to most of the containers that you want, it's good practice to just name the class as container, right? So inside here, we'll now be able to write what we want, right? So can come up with anything. Okay, let me just auto generate text like that. Okay, so we have that. So this text was just generated. Okay, so we have that text. What else? Okay, I think I can also write another one like that. Okay, all right, so we do have 2 paragraphs inside this container, right? Now imagine you want to change the second paragraph, right? You want to change, maybe let's say, the font weight of the second paragraph, right? For the first one, you just want to change the color, but for the second one, you want to change the font weight, right? So how do you go about doing this? Because remember, if we save our work, right, and you just like generate it, get the paragraph to say, okay, what you want to change is the paragraph, right? If you do this and we say font weight, right? We say font weight bold, right? Because we want it to be bold. You change it to that and check. You will notice that all the paragraphs will change to bold, right? But that's not what we want, right? So we want the first one to just change the color without being bold. Then the second one is the one that has to be bold, right? So now using what we've learned, right, on ID and classes, what you can do is, if you want to go with a class, you can give this first paragraph a class of, I don't know, we can call it para1, something like that, right? But always use names that reflect what you are naming, right? Reflect what you're naming. So if this is a nav bar and you're trying to store a nav bar, don't give it names like n or para or what, right? You give it nav, for example, something that will make someone understand to say this is the nav bar, right? This is the nav bar. You can go ahead and even say nav bar, right? Nav bar like that, right? So when someone reads your class, they understand what those styles are doing, right? Or which HTML element they are affecting. Okay, so in this case, we are using just text which is kind of vague, right? Like it doesn't have meaning. So we just say para1 for paragraph, right? So this is paragraph 1. Then for the second one, you can do the same, right? You can create a class and call it para2. Okay. Right. So I'll teach you two ways, right? So two ways in which you can target this, because these classes are unique, right? We've not used them anywhere else. You can just call them directly here, right? For the first one, you can say, right. But one thing that we need to remember again is that for a class, you need to start with a full stop, right? So we save the work like that. So when I save the work, right, we've set font weight for the first paragraph. Okay, we wanted to change the color for this one, but anyways, let's try it. Okay, so when you go, you see that the first one has changed. You've seen that it's now bold, right? But we wanted to change the color, so let's change the color instead, right? So just say blue. Okay, so when you go to our side, you see that the color is what? Blue, right? So now go to the second one. So the second one, that's where we say para 2. Okay, this one we're changing the font weight, okay, to bold like that. So you've seen that we've now achieved our goal. Okay, we've achieved what we wanted. So that's how you can really look at those two. Okay, but another one is so what happens is you can actually call the parent first. Okay, so in this case you can just say this, since it's a class, so full stop, right? Then you say container, right? Then after you call the parent, which is this one, then you can now target the children. Okay, so in this case para1, which is this one. Okay, so nothing will change, still be the same. Seen that? Yeah, so that's another way you can do it, because sometimes you might want to affect both paragraphs, right? So imagine, let's say we don't have these. Okay, then you want to target specifically these paragraphs, because you might have something like this, right? You might have maybe a different let's say this is a section, right? Or to be specific, let's say you have an about section, right? Now you don't want these paragraphs to change. Okay, you don't want them to change. What you want is just these, right? So maybe you just want to change the color of this text which is inside here, right? So if we say paragraph here, right, if we use just p, right, then we say color blue. Okay, it will affect all the text on the page, right? But if you just want the first one, right, we already know that we have a parent which has a class of container, right? So what you do is you first get the parent, which is container, right? Remember, it's a class, so always start with a full stop, then a paragraph, right? So now, because we've done this, this is the parent, this is the child, right? So when we save our work, okay, you will see that only the first one has changed to what? Blue. Okay, the second one is just still black. All right, so that's basically how we can use classes IDs in CSS. Okay, so next up, what we're looking at is how we can use Flex. Okay, Flex. Right, so let's try that out. Okay, so what I'm going to do, okay, is create Let me just create 3 of them. Okay, so I'm going to create 3 divs. Okay, 3 divs. Then I'll give them the same class. Okay, I'll give them the same class. Right. So the class will be, let's name them container. Okay, excuse. Let's name them container. Then the other thing is, because I want to keep track of the divs, I'll give it another class called 1. Okay, so here's the thing. With a class, you can actually add as many classes as you want in the same attribute, right? So here, the way we've put container, you can actually just create a space like that, then add another class. So every time you use any of these classes, they'll work. Okay, so I'll copy this 3 times like that, right? So we now have 1, 2, 3 divs, right? Then this one will be code 2. Then this one will be 3. Now you see the reason why we are having these same containers and these ones are different. Okay, so I want, when we go to our CSS, right? Okay, let's call that container, right? And what we want is to apply the same width. Okay, just 300 pixel. Then the height should be 300 pixel as well. Okay, right now you can't see anything because these don't contain anything. Okay, right. So we've specified the width and the height, but now we want these to have different colors. So what do? We now use these different classes. So that's the reason why we're using these different ones. Okay, so we'll say the first one. Okay, the first one will have a background color of blue. Okay, then the second one will have a background color of, let's say, black. Okay, then the last one, 3, will have a background color of okay, let's say orange. Okay, yeah, I'm just randomly picking these colors. Okay, so we've done that. So when you go on our website, it's zoomed in. So let me just, like, by default it's like this. Okay, this is the normal, like, 100% scale. So we have these divs, right? You've seen them. Now we want to learn on how we can be able to style these divs and create different layouts that we want. Okay, so I'll open Figma. Okay, I'll open Figma, right? So that okay, let me just bring it here, right? So open Figma so that we can see the different layouts that we can create, right? Okay, so here what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this. This is from the previous tutorial. Okay, so now we have these different boxes, right? So we had blue, pink, and we also had what other color did we have? I think black. Yeah, we had black and I think orange. Right. Yeah, we had, I think, yeah, orange should be somewhere here. Yeah. Yeah, so we do have these 3, right? We do have these 3. Let me, yeah, do that. So we do have these 3, right, on our website like this. Okay, so now what we want is to store these in different layouts. I'm sure you've come across a website where maybe they had put images like this, right? Maybe content was like this. Here you have, something else, here something else, and stuff like that, right? It can be maybe text and things like that. Maybe products are aligned like that. Okay, so this is what we want to achieve, right? So we want to achieve such a layout. Okay, so let me even put these in a frame like that. Okay, okay, good. So this is our website. Let me change the background a bit so that it's visible. Gray like that. Okay, so we don't want our blocks to be like this, the way they are, right, on the platform. Let me increase this a bit. Okay, okay, let me not lock it. Okay, so at the moment it's like this, but what we want is this. Okay, something like this. Okay, like that layout. So for us to achieve that type of layout, we use what we call flex. Okay, we use what we call flex. Now, the container that we're going to target for these guys, they need to have the same parent. Okay, they need to have the same parent. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to change this into section. Okay, section, and I'll explain why. So I'll change this into section. Okay, section. Then even here I need to change this into section, right? So that the main parent for these guys should be a div. Okay, sorry, not a div, a container, like should have a class of container like that. Okay, then inside here, that's where we now have that, right? So you've seen that. So we have a main parent, which is container. Then inside we have those three divs. Okay, nothing has changed, still the same. You can still see that, right? Okay, so now what is flex? Okay, so the word flex, let me write it here so that you guys see it. Okay, flex is like this. This is flex. Okay, so flex is just a value. It's just a value that you apply to a property called display. Okay, display like that. So in CSS, you apply something like this. Okay, so what does flex do? What flex does is that it converts HTML elements that are block elements. Okay, there are different types of elements in HTML. So there is what we call block elements and inline elements. Okay. Inline elements. Okay, so block elements and what? Inline elements, right? Block elements and inline elements. What's the difference between these two? Okay, so a block element, let me just get a part of this to explain. A block element occupies the whole space like this. It doesn't matter how much space it needs. If you have a text like this and it's just occupying this space here, if it's a block element, it will occupy the whole space, meaning you can't add anything on the other side here, right? So what that means is if you bring in another element, let's say you bring in this text, right? It can sit next to here. So what it's going to do is that sorry, let me just bring that at the center here. So what it's going to do is that it will push this text down here. Okay, that's what a block element does. But with inline element, if this was an inline element, it only occupies the space that it needs like this. Okay, so if you bring in another inline element, it will push itself this side like that. If you bring in again another inline element, to push itself next to this one like that. But if you bring a block element, because a block element always wants to occupy the whole space, it will push itself down here like that. Okay, and do what? And occupy the whole block like that. Okay, I hope that's clear. Yeah, so that's the difference between a block and an inline element. Let me put those together like that. Okay, so that's the difference between a block element and an inline element, right? So flex just converts a block element into an inline element so that the items are able to sit next to each other like this and not push each other down. Okay, so here in our CSS, what we're going to target is the container. Okay, so here we'll create a container like that and add our display property and give it a flex value. When we save this, you will see what will happen. Okay, you've seen that. So that flex has been able to convert the children, right? Because we are targeting the parent div, this one. So it converts the inside elements, the children. Okay, since we are looking at this as the parent div, then these are the children, right? So it converts all the children into inline elements. Okay, and that's why we've been able to achieve this. Okay, now it's not what we want. We want them to have something, this sort of layout where it's equal, you know, the space here, and here equal. Okay, so I'm going to mention some other properties that we will need to work with whenever we are looking at flex as a value of a property of display. Excuse. Okay, so when we go, okay, so when we go to our code here, right? To our code here, we've already mentioned that these are children, right? So they are the ones that you want to target. So what we're going to do is we'll go back to our container here, right? So if you want to push elements, okay, so there's a property called justify content, okay? There's a property called justify content. Justify content. Yeah, I hope the spelling is correct. Yeah, so there's a property called justify element. Sorry, I mean justify content. Let me remove that. So there's a property called justify content. Okay, so this property helps us to align items horizontally in a horizontal manner, right? That's what this guide does. It helps us align elements horizontally, whether we want our content to be next to each other close up like this, okay, or we want them to be on the other side like that, okay, we can achieve that, okay, or we want them to be like this, okay, we can achieve that, or we want them to be next to each other like this, we can achieve that using justify content, right? It just has different values. So if you want your items by default, okay, by default the elements will always stack next to each other like this, okay, and this value that goes to this guy is called flex stat, okay, it's called flex stat. All right, so the value that causes the elements to be like this, which is the default value, is called flex stat. All right, so it pushes the element on the starting point here, okay. Then the other one where we have something like this, let me select this, okay. Where you have something like this is called flex end, okay, because it's pushing all the elements at the end, right? Then a situation where you have one this side, another one in the middle like that, okay, then another one at the end there is called space between, okay, it's called space between. Let me, yeah, space between like that, okay. But there's also one like this. If you want to align them like this one is called space around, okay, space around. Then there's just one called center. Center is where you now have them, all of them at the center like that, okay. So these are the values that we can use to align our content horizontally, okay. So let's go into VS Code and be able to see how these work. Okay, so we'll add the property called justify content like that, okay. So here we now add, right? So remember we said the first one is what? By default it's called flex start. So if we check our website, nothing will change, right? That's the default. Then another one is called flex end, okay. Another one is called flex end like that. So when you go on this website, you see that it's aligning itself at the end, right? But there's again another one called center that we looked at. So the center one just puts things at the center, right? Then we also looked at space between like that. You've seen that? Then there's space around, okay, space around, which creates space around. Now you notice that we have space around, right, and space evenly, which is one that I didn't talk about, right? So space around creates equal spaces here in the middle, right? And the space which is here is the one that's equal to this one, but these two are not equal. Like the space here and the ones in the middle are not equal, only on the ends here, right? Now space evenly creates equal space everywhere, okay. So let's try to use space evenly, okay, like that, okay. Now you'll be able to see that the space here and here and here and here are the same, Okay, so you can actually use this, and it's very much responsive. If we try to inspect, right, you're able to see that Flex is very much responsive like that. Okay, right, that's good. Then the other one that we can look at is line items. Now with align items, it helps us. Okay, it's just because these guys have got the same height. Right now, imagine if you had something like this. Yeah, something like this, right? Okay, so now the let me add text here. Okay, align items. Okay, so with align items, it has the same values, okay, as the justify content, except the alignment is different, right? So if we say, so we are looking at it from the horizontal point of view, right? We are aligning things on the horizontal point of view, not the vertical, right? Not the vertical, the horizontal type of view. So flex start is at the beginning there, flex end is at the end, center it's here in the middle. Okay, let me remove this one. Flex end is in the middle like that, right? So if we say, if we change, let's say we remove this here, okay, okay, so on section we remove this from here. Okay, let me remove the okay, section, yeah, let me just remove that. Okay, then put on each one but with different heights. So with the first one, we'll say want to achieve something like this. So with the first one, we'll say 400 pixel, and the second one, we'll say 500 pixel, then this one will be 300. Yeah, it will just be like this. So if we save our work, okay, you've seen that, right? It's like that. So here, by default, align items is flex start, okay? But if we say flex end, okay, it will push itself down to the height of this tall one, aligning itself like that. Okay, if we say center, okay, center like that, it will align itself at the center of this tallest one. Okay, so the same properties that we have for the other guy is the same one that we have. I mean, the other guy I meant justify content. Yeah. So the same values that we have for justify content is the same one that we have for align items. Okay. Then there's another property that I didn't talk about. Okay. So imagine in a case where justify content, for example, you've used center. Okay. Let me just say center. Okay. Where it's like this, but you want a specific, you just want like some space between these. There is a property called gap. Okay, so gap, you can specify how much space you need in the middle. So for example, if you say 10 pixel, you save your work, there'll be a gap of 10 pixel here. Okay, if you say 20, or let's say 30, right, you save, you see that it will be 30 like that. Okay, yeah, so I think this is where we end our tutorial. Thanks for watching up to this very end. So from me, I think this is where we end. Then I'll see you in the next one.